Hello, welcome. It's 2019, and this is the Newsy Podcast. Today we talk about Jenni White and her controversial Federalist opinion piece. Coming up. Hello, welcome. This is the Newsy Podcast. Jenni White did nothing wrong. Now, who may you be asking, who is Jenni White? Jenni White is a columnist and an opinion writer at the Federalist, and she recently wrote an opinion documenting her experience raising her adopted Black African children. In the piece, she goes into her interactions with Black Americans in her community. Now, I want to make a full, I just want to be completely transparent before we begin the story that I've known Jenni White for years, and we were on the same side of the debate to end Common Core in Oklahoma. I've, just in my times, all my interactions with her, I've never even gotten a whiff of anything racial or anything like of the sort. She's always been a good person. She's tough as nails. Great writer, just a really tough woman. And a lot of the progress that was made fighting Common Core, she played a huge part in that. I got a lot of respect for Jenni. A lot of respect. And so we were both activists, my wife and me and her husband fighting against Common Core, and to see her have to deal with this, the vitriol she's receiving on Twitter, having to deal with that since writing this piece, calling her city and giving death threats towards her, and sending death threats through Twitter, and calling her a racist and all these other things. I mean, the mobs really come out, and it just goes to show that people don't want to have a conversation anymore. They only want to gang up on people and create these crazy Twitter mobs. I've been done with this for years. I've been done with this outrage culture where you try to get people kicked off of platforms and things like that. I'm done with it. I'm done with it on the left and the right. I'm not going to be in this anymore. And so I had to make this for Jenni because I feel like she needs our support right now. She's under attack. I know most of this is artificial. It's Twitter, so it's not real. And it's important to recognize that, but also understand that there's an impact when you're being called a racist at this frequency, at this level, on these platforms, because people write things about you, they put your name in the title, and they put racist behind it, and that stays online forever. So it's important that we get things out with a counter narrative out, the truth about who Jenni White is. She starts off touching on the Mackenzie Adams story. This is the young Black girl who killed herself after she was bullied by Black students for having a Black friend. Now let's go into the piece. We'll read about the Mackenzie story a little bit. In December, Mackenzie Adams, a fourth grader from U.S. Jones Elementary School in Indianapolis, I think, Alabama. Oh no, Demopolis, Alabama. Despondent after relentless taunting by other Black children for her relationship with a white child, hanged herself in her family's home. Although the suicides resulting from school bullying have sadly risen steadily over the years, Mackenzie's death spoke to me on a very personal level, Jenni White writes. Where does a child even get the idea of hanging themselves? This isn't something that a child comes to on their own. This is highlighted as an extreme case of what goes on in the Black community when it comes to race. We have to remember these things are taught. Children on their own just don't register these type of concepts. Individuals are predisposed to their biases, but to this level isn't natural in my opinion. Jenni talks about visiting family in the Northeast and hearing about the plight of the two little girls that she would later adopt, saying in her story, "In the summer of 2005, while visiting grandparents in the Northeast, my husband and I met with some of my cousins, an international teacher and her new wife, whom he'd met while teaching in Zambia, Africa. In recounting her history, Justina told us of the very recent death of her sisters and how her 21-year-old nephew was struggling to feed and care for the 5 siblings, as young as 2. After much soul-searching and discussion, my husband and I approached Brian and offered to adopt his 2 youngest sisters, who were 2 and 6 at the time. He gratefully agreed, and in May of 2007, after a 2-year adoption process that would have stymied any but the most ardent adoptive parents. I flew to Zambia, Africa to bring home our daughters, Barbara and Betty. Yes, Betty White. Now, I don't think she goes to it in this story, but she didn't name them those names. Those were the names that their mother had given them, and she felt like, as anyone else would feel, who am I to change these kids' names when, their dead mother gave it to them? Anyway, moving on. We know that adopting two little girls, 4 and 9, from the other side of the world into a family of two boys, 4 and 2, wouldn't be in terms of bonding and reassimilating the family's birth order structure, but it was the stuff like what little Mackenzie Adam experienced that we didn't see coming, and it quickly blindsided me. So, um, yeah, I mean, she didn't see this coming. She was thinking, how are these kids gonna deal with, their being orphans, being in a new country, dealing with a new family. She would never think that she would have to deal with the kind of things she would experience coming from the black community. Anyway, as believers and followers of Jesus Christ, we are sometimes called to do extraordinary things. This was one of them. This is a heroic thing this family did, and this is also the most racist thing you could do. If Jenni White was some crazy racist lady, this is the most unracist thing you would do, is adopt two little black kids from Zambia, Africa, and fight for it for 2 years nonetheless. Anyway, later on in the story, she goes on to talk about interaction with the pastor of her church. Let me go into that. One day late that first summer, while out shopping, we ran into one of our associate pastors of our church had provided simply amazing support during our adoption struggles, and it was a joy to have the opportunity to visit with any fellow parishioner and clergy about the adoption, the girls, and our new forever family. So I gratefully stopped to visit with her. As we chatted before we left the store, the pastor, a black woman, suddenly lowered her voice, became somber, and inquired as to how I was misering the girls in their culture. I truly wasn't sure what she meant, so I asked. She then began to sermonize about how important it was for me to get the girls subscriptions to black magazines, to make sure and watch black movies and TV shows so they could see and relate to people of their own color. She veritably assured me that as a white woman, I couldn't be expected to understand the black experience in America. I needed to be sure and make appropriate and relevant material accessible so they could better assimilate with black culture. As a staunch believer in the dream of Martin Luther King Jr., this pastor's admonitions didn't sit well with me. In fact, I knew for certain her guidance for rearing my children was at best perpendicular to his vision. MLK advocated against bitterness and hatred in the black community because his ultimate goal was that the little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. This is 100% true. I will never forget the heat rising in my face. I must have stared at her as though she had grown two heads right in front of me. It actually angered me that instead of focusing on the girls' adoption to a completely new country and their new lives as Americans, this woman chose to hone in on the racial politics, especially as a pastor. Now, I know all about this. I grew up around these circles, and this is nothing new for me. This is par for the course. Anyway, moving on. When I finally composed myself, I offered my thanks but explained that our family didn't really see color, so we had no intention of raising any of the kids in our family to be anything other than Americans. Hence, we probably wouldn't be comfortable taking that kind of suggestion. Discontent with my answer and intent upon pressing her point, she continued. She believed my thought process unfortunate because my whiteness couldn't process the fact that the girl's fate would always balance at the pinnacle of someone else's prejudicial small mindedness. It was up to me to make them vigilant of the discrimination that would surely come their way. See, she wanted them, you got to put this thing on their shoulder. They don't have that chip on their shoulder. They're coming from Zambia. Zambia I don't know how Zambia is, but I'm pretty sure they're not walking around like Americans saying everything's racist. So you got to put this chip on their shoulder. So you got to get them invested in this black community, Airfingers quote, so they can get this chip put on their shoulders. Anyway, carrying on, unable to continue the conversation any longer, I told her we needed to get going. We said our goodbyes, exited the stores, and I fumed all the way home. What is black identity? This is something I've been really trying to figure out from the time I was young. I hear a lot of things about what our identity could be or should be or is going to be or could have been, but I don't see a lot of these things that I hear about being the black culture in America. I can tell you, no matter what black culture may be, for sure, it isn't Zambian culture. American black culture is not, there's no such thing as the Zambian culture and the American culture being the same thing. Those are two separate things. From what I've seen growing up as a black man, is that black culture in America is a belief that you and your people are perpetual victims and will always be. She goes on to talk about the America she wants her adopted daughters to have, the one that Martin Luther King and other activists fought for. And in the piece, she says, talking about that, today my daughters are 21 and 16, and we have raised them and our other three children on this philosophy, yet it somehow continually shocks me that any real racism they've encountered has come from the black contemporaries. Wow. One day we were talking in the kitchen after she returned home from school, where she struggled with the constant racial politics in her college English class. She wanted help beginning her last paper regarding disproportionate brutality by police towards black Americans. She recounted her frustration that so many black contemporaries in the military had razzed her because her last name is White and she'd been adopted by a white family. When I asked her how she dealt with that kind of thing, she shrugged her shoulders and said, "What are you going to do?" Thank God she is a strong woman. Her answer could have been suicide. Wow. I just, that's just, that doesn't surprise me either because, in the black community, you're used to being ridiculed for things that you simply can't help. Her mother gave her that name, her dead mother, but she's ridiculed for that. You can't even have a last name that's white. That's an indictment, you know. It's definitely an indictment. To finish off this story, she talks about another incident one of her daughters faced. And let me read that last one. Betty is my straightforward social butterfly. Although she and the two boys have been homeschooled since 2012, she's participated in no end of our extracurricular activities, knows no strangers. She has no qualms about providing her opinion on anything to anyone at any time. Currently, she's a manager on the local homeschool football team. She also nannies and runs her own photography business, which is fantastic. The other night, she came home from practice and told us that one of the black boys on the team, who constantly makes racial comments, had called another black boy the N word. So she uses the N word. I'm going to say nigger. So one black boy called another black boy a nigger. Characteristically, Betty told him not to use that word because it was disgusting. He then said something like, "What do you mean? You're a nigger too." Now, this is a black boy saying these things. She told him she was in no way a nigger, yet he was apparently intent on convincing her she was. His next retort was something like, "Hey, we are both from Africa." She said she looked him straight in the face and said, I'm sure with her hilarious sharp attitude and a little head bob for good measure, "I'm from Africa, you're from Oklahoma, and I'm no nigger." That's a powerful story. That shows you right there him trying to put that American culture onto her. And like I said before, the American culture is having the mantle of victimhood placed on your shoulders. So he's trying to put that mantle on her and say, "No, here's your victimhood." And she's like, "No." He's like, "We're from Africa, so we're supposed to have the victim." Like, "No, I'm not. You're not from Africa. Your culture is not my culture. My culture is Zambia. Your culture is that victim mentality, and I'm not going to put that on. She went on to tell us this kid has also mocked her about hanging around white kids, including her white boyfriend, who was also on the team and acting and speaking like she is white. Again, if Betty hadn't had a strong personality, look at this kind of ridiculing and behavior from someone who looks like her done to her emotionally. We know what it did to Mackenzie. Wow. Just very, very powerful. My wife talked about being harassed by her peers for not being, quote, black enough and for not talking black enough, whatever that means. I can tell that hurt her deeply. It's amazing that simply being yourself is worthy of being called out and separated from people that look just like you. And that's our culture. The story goes on, and you definitely should read it. She's an amazing writer. She's a large body of work at the Federalist, and she's a really good writer, and probably the least racist person you'll ever meet. Incredibly not racist, and I mean, say it ain't so. A conservative that's not racist. Anyway, some of my thoughts on this. One of the hardest things I've ever had to face was being rejected by the community that I grew up in. I still struggle with rejection to this day. If not for God continuing to heal me of that pain, I don't know where I would be. I pray that God continues to bless this family. And I'm almost willing to 100% bet that this won't go down in vain. This whole ordeal. She's receiving death threats from people on Twitter, and people are going crazy, and they're just trying to turn this into some sort of crazy racist diatribe when it's the exact opposite. And I think what a lot of people miss, like I said before, especially people invested in this black American culture, believers in this black American culture, they want these kids to wear that, and that they're not going to put it on. They refuse to. And God help them, because that's it's a hard life, and I'm a living testament to that. My family is. And we've taken that thing off, and my wife outright rejected it at a young age, and I took it off. And people look at you different, people treat you different. You're a pariah in your own community. It's a hard life. I don't really know what the answer is right now. I guess God is the only answer, especially to things like this. Anyway, this is Kevin, signing off. Peace.